have you in the studio recording this podcast. Would you please introduce yourself for our listeners?
Thank you so much, Dipsa. I'm so happy that I got this opportunity to be here. And hello and Johar, everyone. I'm Archana Soreng. I belong to Khariya tribe from Sundargarh district of Odisha. I have been working with UN Secretary General as his youth advisor on climate change, and I'm a former member of UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change from 2020 to 2023. I have been a researcher and working on rights of Indigenous people, local communities, climate justice, and also in terms of rights of Indigenous people. Well, when I have to introduce myself, there's this element of what I do and who I am. And that's why I tend to have this reflection of, who I am is something rooted with what I do. And there I would like to formally introduce myself is like my name is Archana Soreng, where the meaning of my surname Soreng means rock, and I'm here very much rock and still to advocate for Indigenous people and climate action.
What a beautiful introduction. There are so many feathers, and yet you choose that one beautiful beginning where you're explaining your surname. Wow. That is the start of our conversation. Let us talk about a journey, the journey that you have had from the forests of Orissa to the cities of the world.
Journey is an intergenerational concept. It starts off from my grandparents to my father and mother parents and to myself. I come from a very small village from Sundargarh district, which is Balipos, which is my ancestral home of my father. This brings me down that today, if I am here doing the work I am doing, is because of my grandparents and because of my parents. My grandfather has been a strong pioneer of community led forest protection practices. He was of the staunch believer that if you don't have a sustainable relationship with nature and land and forest, you cannot have a sustainable life. And brought into my father, who have been an advocate for land rights and forest rights along with my parents. When I was growing up, when I was in class 10, after my schooling, my both of my parents, given the situation and the circumstances we are coming from, it's like if you really want to contribute back to the community, you have to enter into policy making. And that particular sentence, that particular advice has changed my life completely. And that is what has guided me to who I am. Because that is what makes me realize that today, if I'm working in the climate action or climate justice space, has to do a lot more with our worldview, our way of living, and most importantly, our community's way of taking care of nature. There's also this thing of where do people want to see us? And that makes me believe that my voice is important. My voice matters. And I have to take the knowledge of my ancestors, my family, of how they have been leading an eco friendly way of living, how they have contributed towards climate action. And most importantly, it's not about a single family, but it's entire community of Indigenous people. When I was in graduation, I had this opportunity to go on a field visit. I had gone to Chhattisgarh, and I was like super excited because you get 48 hours to stay in a village. It's the first village visit and, engaging in all of the spaces. And to my surprise, admiration, and all of it, I saw that they were also eating in leaf plates. They were also making these leaf plates, which happens in my family, also in our region, also. And there was no concept of waste. because it's like whatever peels of vegetables is there, it's been eaten by the cattles. So there was no kind of that waste pollution happening around, because it was like a eaten by themselves. And also there is this element of which is I have seen it in my own village. It's like my family used to eat the vegetables and dry it, the outer crust of those vegetables, which is used was like water bottles to go when they used
Oh,
to go for
wow.
agriculture. So I didn't see the plastic bottles like these days now, back then. And similarly, I saw these things also hanging in the households. Um, but at the same time, it was so sad to see and hear from them the element of displacement, the element of pollution. There's this element of human trafficking also there. And that is what made me realize that what issues they are facing in Chhattisgarh is also the issues which we are facing in Odisha. And that made me realize that what can be done to address these issues in a larger scale of across states. And that is when one of the key observation and learning was there. It has to be policy making, because it's only when you are in policy making spaces you will be able to work on issues in a widespread. And that is also, I think, has been an important part of my journey, is like I want to be in the policy making spaces, along with to voice my opinion and perspective of my communities. It's super important to make difference across states, across regions. And at that point of time I also lost my father, who has been really instrumental in my life when I was in masters. That made me realize that all of this knowledge, all of this source of identity, culture of my community will be lost if I don't go back to my village. And that is when I realized that our loved ones, our elders, will not be there with us for long. And we as young people need to go back to our communities and work for our communities and advocate for it, because the crisis we are facing at this moment, climate crisis, is a global crisis, but it affects everyone differently.
I mean, such a beautiful thought. I kept on getting this question the last 4, 5 years that I've been in Odisha, that you studied in Geneva, you've worked in Delhi, what are you doing back home? And to explain why I've come back home to work in policy is so difficult. And I see you going through the same thing. The questions are similar, right, for you? And the voices, you mentioned voices. And my question to you is, do you see representation in policy spheres?
So there's this element of when I came back home, when I was engaging and working as part of Vasundhara, the first time I got participated in the UN spaces was UNCCD conference of parties. UNCCD is like United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification, the Land Convention. And it was in 2019 when I participated. And that made me so sad in the youth summit, that I was the only tribal in that entire summit from across the country. And this just took me so back, like, where are my people? And at that point of time, definitely I was like, it was a heartbreaking, but also at this point of time there was this element of solidarity, that I had so many other indigenous leaders, youth leaders from different regions of Africa and Latin America. And that made me realize that I am not alone. There are my indigenous people across different regions, but also that had an element of like I need to access the space, which also brings down to the thing of, for me, climate justice also means reclaiming spaces. And that brings me to the fact that I have been in a lot of rooms where I'm the only one representing. And this makes me uh, it's a bittersweet kind of thing, that there's a bit of happiness that I have been able to access the spaces which has been inaccessible for years, but this element of sadness deep within, that why it's me, the one, even in today, it's like the 21st century we're talking about, why there's still the basic representation and participation is a huge issue. And that is where I feel we need adequate leadership and participation of Indigenous peoples across decision making spaces. I was the only one who was Indigenous in a UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on climate change. It was an honor to represent Indigenous
Oh, wow.
communities, Asia and India. But at the same time, I also feel that, there's this element when we talk about decision making spaces, is that we all are facing similar issues, different in degrees and kinds, but we all need nuances when it comes to policy making and implementation, because that is where the challenges happens, that is where the problem happens. You can assume, you can take one policy made from this region to that region without consulting the communities on ground, and that would lead to a blunder there, because that is not the need. And that is why I feel we need not only representation in the policy making spaces in terms of, finalizing of the policies, but a curating of policies, implementation of agent policies, and monitoring of policies as well.
You've already answered my question, but I'd like to ask you again. Um, you've traveled around the globe by now. Do you think India is keeping up with this international movement towards inclusivity?
I think there's a huge potential of doing that, but I feel there is way more that needs to be done. And this brings me down to the perspective of NDCs, of Paris Agreement. I am
Could you please
very,
explain NDC to our
yes.
listeners?
NDCs is the nationally determined contributors, which all the countries who are part of Paris agreements are kind of writing as a commitment of what they will do in terms of addressing climate crisis. Even now, after 5 years of Paris agreement, we have countries who do not have young people, who do not have women incorporated in the NDC, even articulated. And this is only for women and youth, but there is a huge chunk of countries who have not even mentioned the word indigenous peoples in their NDCs, and forget about implementation. And this breaks my heart, because if it has not made to those policy documents and commitment, where will we have those implementation? And these again comes back to, Dipsha, it's about basics,
Correct.
very basics of policy making. Like, you are failing to acknowledge the stakeholders engaged in this, and you're talking about addressing climate crisis, which is a humongous challenge, which is impacting everyone in a very different way. So I would say that, if you have to lead in this, you can uh, lead on this, but that requires you to be a active listener, observant, and lead by actions, which means that you have to have indigenous people, tribal communities, local communities, young people, and people those who are in margins in the policy spaces, in the policies, acknowledging their issues, recognizing their rights. Which also, there's this thing, they are in the front lines, but they are not in the front pages of the newspapers. And that is what I feel, that we need stronger NDCs, we need stronger commitments, and we need stronger implementations.
It feels like a top down approach, don't won't you say? Because they're so not connected with the grassroots. Their perspectives when it comes to policy making is what they hear and see, which is level 3, tier 1, 2, 3. And it's just sad. Um, would you say COP is helping or no?
I would say COP is a very important process, definitely. But let me break it down for you. It makes me again further sad that, a lot of my friends, a lot of our community, young people, are not able to access COP because of visa issues.
And funding?
Funding, of course, is a huge thing. So I started off with visa because it's the smaller issue, and then I would lead to funding. And, this is the irony.
The irony here is COP28 is being sponsored by oil and gas companies. That is the irony.
I'm laughing, but I'm laughing with a lot of
Pain.
pain, because this is what young people have been advocating and saying, that how will we have policies and decision for climate action when we have influence and decision making spaces taken over by the fossil fuels. And this also leads to a bigger question of who is in the room and who is in the decision making spaces, which also I would like to weave in this entire thing of again participation, because this again leads to challenges to access COP. So, like, first of all, do we have languages which is being spoken by the communities, and mechanism to interpret that? We have languages of interpretation only for a certain languages, like for example if you say UN languages. But it's also really important to understand that a dialogue will only happen when we have language justice, and there are way too many languages. What is the mechanism around that? Which also requires that, can we have national level plans on this, regional level local plans on this, where we are taking into consideration of a having more interpretations, allocation of funds for interpretation, because there's this element of we cannot have interpreters because we don't have money. It's a high budget thing. If we don't have money to have a dialogue, how can we have money for other purposes when you have huge amount of money for other purposes? And there is this element of, like, do we know that there's something like God? Who knows? And this is, I'm saying it from a place when I am really humble of being able to access those spaces and have participated in it, in the COPs. But the thing is, like, the people who will be impacted by the COP decisions, do they know that there is process like this, and are they consulted around this, of this COP decision and has happened, we want to take it into consultation and engage with them? Or there's a COP happening, what is your perspective? So we need to be informed by the communities, those who are on ground facing the impacts of climate crisis, and they need to be there in spaces like COP. And then coming back to the visa issues are so real, because a lot of communities and countries are blacklisted in a lot of spaces, and this is something, a huge challenge faced by young people. And there is safety issues, security issues, because you raise your voice, you speak the realities. So that's also there. And there is this element of entire expenses being borne of uh, how will the people attend COPs when they do not have resources, and who will provide resources? So it has to be an institutional support which needs to be there. So I would say that COP is super important for decision making spaces, and we all need to be part of that processes. But I would say that this is a visitor circle, national level, regional level, whatever local level, whatever is happening in terms of issues needs to go to COP, and the decisions needs to come back here, and that loop needs to happen. Until and unless that loop happens, then we are not able to address that, and we are still talking about the logistic issues of people participating, funding, visa, safety, security. We need to way we need to move way beyond this when we are literally struggling for basics.
You just spoke about the cycle that goes on in a loop, but I believe that the cycle is not complete. There are broken spaces, the wheel does not function properly. but you would be able to tell us better about it, about the gaps.
It was only in 2018 in the IPCC report. IPCC report is one of the very important report,
Correct.
uh, which talks about climate crisis, and the scientists alarm us, tell us the challenges and also recommendation. There they have mentioned that role of indigenous peoples and their significance and recognizing their importance in climate action. The second thing is like recognizing the rights over the land, forest, and territories is important, and also recognizing about emphasizing on supporting, promoting, and documentation of the traditional knowledge and practices. And that is also one of the key thing which has been advocated in COP is like, it is important for climate action. When I but when I come down here in the national level, um, we have Forest Rights Act
Correct.
2006, and it is a very important act for tribal communities which recognizes their rights over their land and forest, um, and most importantly also supports the tribal communities in terms of the traditional knowledge and practices. But are we seeing it in a lens that that issue of climate crisis can also be addressed by effective implementation of this law, which is called Forest Right Act? I fail to see that amount of interrelation and interpretation of laws. And that is a fragmented loop which you are seeing is so important, because we need departments to work in coherence. Indigenous people should be leaders of climate action, not victims of climate policies.
What a beautiful thought.
um, because the thing is, we want to protect the world and the world's biodiversity. But as per the reports, 80% of the world's biodiversity is protected by indigenous people who comprise of less than 5% of the total population.
Wow, commendable.
And this population here on ground is living a life with their land, their forest. But if we are not recognizing their rights, then again we are implementing a plantation law where we are evicting them, displacing them to have those plantation. Then that is such an irony. Plantations or afforestation is one of the solutions for climate mitigation. We need more plantation, we need more forest areas. And that is why I would say often, if you do not think through, the policies made for climate mitigation will make the communities vulnerable in terms of climate adaptation and resilience. And let me give you this example. I had gone to field visit to meet community leaders, and when I met the community leader here in India in Orissa, I said that. How are you, how have you been doing? So they're like, we are happy, we're doing good, but there's this challenge of people have come to our village, and they want to plant trees, and we are protesting. And I was like, what happened? What they want to plant, and why are you protesting? So they said that they had brought fruit trees. And I was like, fruit trees? Okay. I was like, what's the problem in fruit trees? Because even
Commercially viable trees.
it's like, what's the problem in fruit trees? So then they said that if they plant mango trees and jackfruit trees in the periphery of our village, then wild animals, wild boars will come to eat it, and they will destroy our agriculture crops. And that took me so back, because yes, they are tribal, I am tribal, but I don't know the context where they are living in and their issues. And you can't make policies sitting above saying that afforestation will change the dynamics, when the afforestation implementation can completely ruin the dynamics on ground. And then they said that we need sal leaf, because that is important for our ecosystem and biodiversity. We want sal trees to be planted here. And this brings me from a lens of climate mitigation by that plantation was happening. I'm tending to speak in Odia because this conversation has been in Odia. There's this thing of they if you see that these plantation drives is mostly pushed for climate mitigations, and then if that would have happened, those plantation, then when they would have, like, um, rains in a unplanned way, or um, not in a seasonal way, then their crops is lost by the animals, and also they don't have anything to have in terms of food and livelihood, because it is also lost in the climate crisis. And this is so important to understand, that policies needs to be informed, and free prior informed consent of community needs to be taken. And there's this another example which I would also like to give. Like, we are talking a lot about loss and damage in the global dynamics, and this is something I have been reflecting a lot, is that when we talk about loss and damage, there's this thing of what what looks to our eye and what doesn't looks to our eye.
Invisible barriers.
Yeah, so, like, if you see in the coastal areas, we see the loss, like loss of lives, loss of households, loss of cattle and shelters and all of it. But I come from a very forested place. There will not be the loss which you see it in the
Coastal region.
coastal regions, but that mere drop of rain itself is killing people as a slow death, because that rain which is happening is destroying the entire crop. And that, because of that rain, in a continuous fashion, people have to migrate, and people are in debt, and that burden falls on women, because the women are the ones who are taking care of the household, the agriculture, because the men goes out. It's also linked to loss of identity, culture, tradition, language, because of this. And in a lot of places we have also seen that that has also led to loss of their husband and family members. How do we compensate this loss, or how do we see these laws when these are not acknowledged even? So I want to say that when we are talking also about these thematics issues of loss and damages, it is so different in terms of different contexts. And that is where, as you said, I'm weaving in again the issue of participation. We need more research, we need more documentation, we need more participation from the community themselves, because what they are facing is something which no one else can explain. And that is why our voice matter, which again brings down to the fact, how do we make sure that these issues are addressed, and why are even the community important?
Can we talk about the women of the community?
Yes, a lot of the children have been able to access education because of the women. Forest based livelihood is one of the major source of income of tribal communities. And who are the ones who are engaged in this? It's the women.
Women for the win. we discussed the Siali festival. Would you like to tell our listeners about the Siali festival and the role
Yes,
of women there?
yes. So Siali festival is a festival celebrated by women in Nayagar. There was an incident when I had got an opportunity to speak to the women leader of those communities, and they said there was a time in their village, in the forest, when they had absolutely no siali tree. I mean, like sal tree in their
Wow. When was
village.
this?
This was, I think, almost like 40 to 50 years back. And that impacted a lot, not only their income, economic way, but it also impacted them on a sustenance way of food, because they that's a major source, like stitching siali leaves,
Correct.
and that is has been a major
The
source.
plates,
Plates,
the
eating, spiritual
yes.
values of making food around that. So it impacted them a lot. And that is when they prayed to the sal tree, and they had the siali seeds, and they put cow dung on that, covered on that, and planted across the place. And the next year, the entire forest had a lot of siali leaf and sal trees, and that is what and why it is celebrated as Siali festival. It's a day of thanksgiving. It's a day of rejoicing. It's a way of expressing a gratitude. It's a day of knowing where we come from as an identity.
And the rituals. I was very lucky to see one of the rituals during Siali festival. Please tell our people about Thingapali.
50 to 70 years back, there was this huge thing of people coming and stealing their forest. Stealing their forest.
Oh
It's like
yes, that's
stealing.
happening. That's definitely happening.
And that is when they made this thing of who will protect the forest. And they had men's who will protect. And there was a point they realized, which is also a reflection, is that the community's members said that because there were timber mafias and because they were men, there were more like conflicts started, fights started. And there was this point of like, because the conflict and the fight started, then there was a point that they said that if we have women in the protection in the forefront, because of the stronger laws for women, they will not be able to do anything. So we will have
Wow.
women there.
Was this a local decision or a tribal leader decision?
So it was a community decisions there. And that is where it started. But there was a point again where the women are like, because of us, we have protected the forest and we want to be part of the decision making process.
Oh, very
And
interesting.
we will be protecting the forest here on, because you were not able to do it. We have been doing it, and we need to be part of the decision making process, and we take this ownership on us. Taking ownership of the process is so important because people fail to give us the ownership or take the credit from us. And that is when it's been 50 to 70 years that things have been continuing now. Every single morning, the community members wake up in the morning, do the household chores, uh, and then take the stick.
Which is
Uh,
Tinga.
yeah. So stick means thinga, pali means turn.
Done.
So, and then they go for patrolling. This, how is this turn aspect is coming across? It's like, uh, today is my turn, tomorrow is your turn. So this stick also rotates in the village. So like, if I am going today, when I come back, I will keep the stick in the next house, so so it's done. So there's this element of protecting the forest. Taking the stick is like tuck 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 tuck, so when you make noise and go, so people know that someone is protectors.
Coming.
And over the years they have been able to protect that areas.
And you
Hear
said it's
this.
all voluntary. So there's no compulsion that if I get the stick, I have to go.
Yeah, but then there is this thing of willingness, and there is
Community feeling.
community feeling. And this is something which I would also come down to, is like, why are these women doing like this? What motivates them, and what is the thought process around this? One of the key thing which I personally feel which has inspired me is like, this selfless thing of protecting the forest is also because of this feeling and relationship which I have with forest. Like, these women consider forest as their children, and also they consider it as mother. This entire analogy of mother children, taking care of us, blessing us, providing us food. But then seeing it from today's lens, which makes me also feel this from this element is like they are protecting this for with their worldview, not only for them, for each one of us. The least we can do for them is give their rights over their land, their forest, which they are protecting, which we have not given to them, which is a struggle and which is still in the process of implementation. And that is what I feel like, if you now see it from a lens of justice quotient, is like who is contributing towards climate action, who is being impacted by climate crisis, and who is the one who is causing climate crisis. This entire dynamics needs to be dwelled upon and reflected from a lens of climate justice, because these communities members are, and we need stronger policies for them.
Aren't there overview mechanisms that are taking care of the cons that come with the so called development that is happening around your area or in general? Are there policies in place? Are there inspection mechanisms? Are there any law stopping them from taking over the land per se?
I think there's this element of definitely when we talk about PESA, Panchayat Extension Act, or Forest Right Act, we do have laws which are supposed to prevent the communities from being evicted, displaced, and recognizing the rights over the land, forests, and territories. But there's also this again the quotient of implementation, of course. So I would like to see this from a lens of not only mere one act or two act, but go back to the Constitution of India, like the fundamental rights, the right to life, right to good health.
Right to habitat, right
Yeah,
to livelihood.
yes. And that is something which we need at this point of time to have an intersectional and intergenerational worldview on policy making and implementation. We can't no longer see all of this in isolation. And that's the challenge we are facing. Like, we have certain, like, we will only focus in this. We will only focus in this. When the issue which we are facing is such multidisciplinary.
Do you have some better solutions? Some things that you have learned from your contemporaries globally? What are the best practices? How do we move forward from here? How do we reimagine borders? How do we find solutions to this?
I think for me, when we are talking about solutions, recommendations, one of the key thing which for me is really important is knowing your stakeholders. And this is something we are taught in policy making.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Dyna-
Basic 101.
Dynamics is knowing your stakeholders.
Yeah.
And when knowing your stakeholders come, I would like to again go back to young people, or specifically tribal communities, as I said, as worldview, way of living, and their practices, traditional knowledge and practices. So until and unless you have this awareness of how they function, what are the challenges, and what are the issues, and how they are contributing, you will not able to make policies which is beneficial to them and beneficial for everyone, which again brings, like, thing of intent without a efficient design is useless, and intent uh, without the intention of effective implementation again doesn't work.
Mhm.
So that is what I feel like, intent without a proper protocol is again faulty. That's what I would like to say, that first, free prior informed consent of indigenous people or tribal communities super important. I can't emphasize on this way more than this, because this is the important thing. And it's also the thing is ki ask us.
Mhm.
Like,
पूछ तो लो.
it's like let us know, like, ask us. And there's this thing of, allyship I would like to emphasize and focus is like, I believe in allyship, I believe in solidarity, but I also acknowledge that, how there has been appropriation, how there has been mistrust around this. I feel there is really important to reimagine how solidarity will look. And for me, solidarity is very sacred. And solidarity comes from a lens of, I can offer this, and being honest of what you can do. And we all are unique and we all can do that. And this is also coming from a lens of, second thing which I would like to emphasize is, once you know your stakeholders, involve your stakeholders, which is like participation, leadership. And then I feel, be fearless to take bold decisions, because we cannot surpass the issues which we are facing being blind, in the sense of denial, denying that it exists. And that is really important when I say that, the denial quotient of the issues we are facing, because often that is not an issue for you because of your privilege, but that is an issue for the communities on ground. And that is an issue for each one of us. So we need to come out of our comfort zone while planning policies and working around that.
On that note, thank you so much, Archana, for coming down today. You were hard to find, but I'm so happy that we could finally record an episode with you. And I hope that you would come back again for a little more knowledge dissemination, if not to just spend time with us.
Thank you so much, Dipsha. But now that you have been so sweet to me and, giving me this platform, I would like to sing a song for you.
Oh, yippee!
And I think this is one of my favorite song. And this is the first song which I learned from my grandmother.
Wow.
So this is, again, I would like, now that the ball is on my court, I would like to share that, um, embracing our identity as a tribal youth is very important for me, because I feel like embracing our roots and being proud of it is super, super important at this point of time. And I remember this thing of, when I first became the part of UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group, we had a meeting with Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, and she
Mhm.
had told this, which I remember, and this is very special to me, that never ever forget your roots and your communities. And also, there's this thing, when I met Secretary General, he had said that, be fearless, speak your mind out.
You're a rock, Archana.
So, in this little funny, beautiful song, you are getting to know about what kind of trees and leaves are there, but also getting to know that kids are also involved, but also getting to know that how to pluck the leaves. So, the song goes like this. Kanan kanan kuruki aralsa kamte mai ghai sunda. Ighai sundar re aralsa kamte mai ghai sunda. Ani chanani dhiram dhiro. Sa domte kamte mai dhuru domte fekai te mai ghai sunda. Sa domte kamte mai dhuru domte fekai te mai ighai sundar. Ighai sundar re oral sa kamte mai ghai sundar. Ani chanani dhiram dhiro.